What's going on, everybody? I am back. We have episode number 97 of the Club and Sub podcast. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about UFC Vegas 57. Headlining this card, we have Arman Tsarukyan taking on Baze Gamrot. They're going to be two of the top 155-pound prospects are fighting. Winner at least is one step closer to a title shot here. It's a great fight. It's a very interesting measuring stick for each guy, in particular Gamrot, who has kind of just burst onto the scene the last 2 years. And so, yeah, I'm going to go through every fight here. We were obviously supposed to do the show last night. It was supposed to be Lags and Luke holding it. Unfortunately, both of them had things come up. So I am not busy today, so I decided I'll come on, I'll do it myself, and yeah, we'll go through every fight one at a time. So guys, if you like the show, please drop a like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot, and we really appreciate it. And yeah, other than that, good luck on your bets. If you have any comments, since I'm alone, just drop them in the chat, and I'll answer any questions that pop up, provided they're relevant. And yeah, with that, I'm going to jump right in here. So first fight of the night, we got Jinyu Fry. She's taking on Vanessa Demopoulos. Jinyu Fry's coming off a win against Ashley Yoder, which is probably the best she's looked in the UFC to date, if we're being honest. Demopoulos coming in off of getting dropped by Silvana Gomez Juarez and then winning via armbar. It's an interesting fight. We have Fry at minus 225, Demopoulos plus 190. I initially thought I might bet Demopoulos here on some of the early numbers when we were seeing Demopoulos around plus 250, plus 270 range, just because, I'm always very cautious about backing Jinyu Fry. She is the more technical striker here. She's the more technical fighter everywhere, most likely. But, Jinyu Fry is someone who just doesn't do a whole lot in her fights. She throws almost no volume, very happy to give away minutes on the feet. Grappling, she's not bad. But again, we saw her get subbed by Kay Hansen. She is subbable. And on the other side, you have Demopoulos, who is basically a doer of everything. She's very sloppy. She's very easy to hit. But Demopoulos comes forward. She pumps out volume. And she's probably one of the more instantaneously dangerous WMMA fighters in the 115-pound division, at least in the bottom tier of it. Obviously, there's more dangerous fighters near the top of it. But she is capable of finishing fights, and she will pump out volume. And so, that's a weird dynamic. And even though I do think, stylistically, Fry should have her way here. I don't think Demopoulos gets takedowns very easily, and Fry should pick her apart standing. Her willingness to do nothing could make this a much closer fight than what the odds indicate. But with that said, at Demopoulos plus 270, I thought that was interesting. Now it's down to about Fry's about minus 225 now. It's around 70% implied, and that seems to me to be about right, if I'm being honest. So it's a pass here. I do think, though, that Demopoulos probably deserves a bit more credit than she's getting. Second fight of the night, we got Mario Batista. He is coming back up of beating Jay Perrin. He's taking on Brian Boom Kelleher. It's a cool fight. We have Batista currently lined at about minus 170 at some books. And I think the line, I think it's right on the Kelleher side in that plus 145 range. I think it's probably a tad wide on the Batista side, so I don't think there's much betting value. I guess my feeling is I think Batista should win every second of this fight until he's not. I love Brian Kelleher. I've obviously bet him a fair bit throughout his time in the UFC. The problem is Kelleher it's not even that he has poor minute winning tools. He throws a lot of volume and, he will grapple, but he just has no defense at all. Anybody with reasonable footwork can usually do a pretty good job avoiding his strikes and landing heavy. You saw Kevin Kroom, I think it was one fight ago or two fights ago, basically land at will at distance against Brian Kelleher. That fight obviously changed when Kelleher realized he could take him down with impunity. But I don't think he'll have that as much success with the grappling here, to be honest. I think he's going to have a hard time getting Mario Batista down and or controlling him. And on the feet, I suspect Batista should be able to really dominate this fight. I think he's going to touch him pretty much at will. The big concern, the reason I'm not betting Batista with that dynamic is Kelleher, if you look, I think he's got 8 finishes in the UFC. He's one of the more dangerous bantamweights or featherweights on the roster. And, the one thing I can't get out of my head with Batista is that Trevin Jones fight. He got rocked badly in that fight. And I don't even think Jones is a huge hitter, if I'm being honest. So that's concerning. But ultimately, I think he should take care of business. I respect Kelleher's finishing ability enough to say that, Batista, it's hard for Batista to be better than say 60%, which is around where the Kelleher line implies Batista about 60% right now. So like if we got like Kelleher plus 180 or something on fight night, maybe I would take like a small poke. But as of now, I think this is pretty much where it should be. Moving on, though, we got Cody Durden and JP Baze. I actually do have a pretty big bet here. I bet Cody Durden for 2 units at plus 100. Currently, the line on this fight, we got Durden about minus 105. There's still some books that have plus 100. Bet Rivers, if he has it, is plus 101. Baze minus 115 on the other side. Frankly, it's interesting because I was planning to bet Durden when it opened everywhere when he was minus 120. And so I was a little surprised, and I am a little surprised at the JP Baze love in the market, to be honest, because I just personally, I've faded Baze in his first fight in the UFC with Bruno Silva, and I just don't. I shouldn't say he doesn't do a lot well. Like his entry, he's obviously a wrestler-based guy who likes to choke people, and his entries are quite fast and they're pretty slick. And I think he's pretty good at getting takedowns. The problem is I don't think his jiu-jitsu is the most positionally sound in the world. I don't think he, in general, grappling is positionally sound. So, if he can't wrap up a choke quickly, any guys that can scramble are likely to be able to scramble up without too much difficulty. The other problem is when he has to fight on the feet, not only does he have no defense, but he's also remarkably hittable. And, on top of that, he's also very, very gassy. The guy tends to slow down very dramatically as fights go on. And I know, that's kind of, I think, why everybody hates Cody Durden, because obviously people remember him slowing down badly in the Chris Gutierrez fight and the Ichi Kulang fight. But this is like the rare place where I don't think Durden's at a huge cardio disadvantage. And in this fight, it's like I feel, look, Durden's a very good wrestler. I'm a little hesitant to say he's a better wrestler than Baze. I'm not sure that's true. But I don't think there's very much danger of Durden getting stuck on his back here. He actually has pretty good get-up game. If you go back and watch his regional fight with Jared Scoggins is a very good grappler, and Scoggins could not hold him down at all in that fight, even late after they'd been going for like a hard 15 minutes. And so I could see Durden sticking his head in a choke like that. I could see him making a reckless mistake, attempting a takedown, but I don't. I really, really struggle to see Cody Durden getting controlled on the mat for long periods of time. And on the feet, I think he's a much better striker. The truth of the matter is we saw him hang with Kulang on the feet. We saw him in round 2, especially against Chris Gutierrez, hang there standing. They're obviously both considerably better strikers than JP Baze is. Durden's a much more durable fighter, too. I don't make Durden a big favorite, but I think he should be a moderate favorite here. The truth of the matter is the biggest red flags on Durden is cardio, but he has cardio edge or not an edge, but this is one of the few guys with similar cardio concerns to him in this division. And then obviously, he has had a penchant for sticking his head in chokes before, but I don't put that much stock in like the Jimmy Flick fight. Like getting flying triangles, it's like, I don't know. I don't take it that seriously. I think Durden should be out around minus 185 here. I think he mostly has Baze covered everywhere. And so I'm happy to take a 2-unit shot at Durden in this spot. Only 2 units just because I don't, it is low level, and that's something I've made a mistake with in the past. But I really, really think Durden should be fine here. Moving on, we got Raulian Paiva. He's taken on Sergey Morozov. Pretty interesting fight. Paiva obviously coming off a fairly brutal finish against Sean O'Malley, and Sergey Morozov coming off being brutally finished by Douglas Da Silva de Andrade. So, not that I have major durability concerns with either, but, obviously we've seen these guys both get finished fairly recently, which is always a little concerning. But in terms of this fight in general, I guess for me, I have moderate interest in the Morozov side, and I haven't bet it, but I've been trying to target like minus 125, minus 130 range for him. And right now he's around minus 140. So I'm still kind of targeting that number, and I'm kind of hoping money comes in on the Paiva side. For me, the issue with me, Raulian Paiva, I know a lot of people liked him coming into the UFC, was treated as a pretty big prospect. I just, when I watch his game, I don't think he does very much well. And that's kind of the problem. Like, he's obviously very durable. He has okay cardio, and he has a very strong get-up game. The problem is his offense, though, while it can be potent if he lands, he's not a very accurate striker, and he's remarkably hittable, and he's very, very easy to take down. And so, like, you guys know me, I am not the guy who comes out here laying minus 300s, but I laid the wood with O'Malley against him in his last fight because it's just like a not accurate striker against a guy like O'Malley who's hard to hit and is very accurate. Like, it couldn't be easier. And like that's always for me with Paiva. For me to bet Paiva in fights, it's got to be something like the Phillips fight where I think his durability and hardware can kind of outlast what's coming back at him, because I think he's going to struggle badly to win minutes at this level against anyone decent. And I kind of think that's the dynamic here. Morozov, the truth is the market was probably a little too high on him coming into the Douglas De Silva and Andrade fight. The truth of the matter is his two fights in the UFC prior to that were getting submitted by Umar Nurmagomedov and then dominating Khalid Taha. But Khalid Taha is not much of a grappler, and I think people put too much stock in that. But what I will say is I actually thought up until he got hurt in round 2, I actually thought he looked pretty good against Douglas Andrade. His striking looks very clean. He actually hurt Andrade on the feet in round 1. His wrestling looks very good, as it normally does. And I think he started to slow a bit, and then he got cracked, and that kind of just snowballed from there. But look, I don't think Morozov is the kind of fighter who's going to contend for a belt ever. I just don't think he has the athleticism, to be honest. But he's almost the polar opposite of Paiva, where it's like maybe you have some durability concerns and concerns about athleticism, but I actually like the toolkit he brings to the table quite a bit. He's a decent striker. He's fairly busy on the feet, and he attempts a ton of takedowns. And so he's a guy who, against most competition that isn't just flat out better than him, is going to consistently win minutes. And in this fight, I think that's going to be the dynamic here. I think Morozov should be able to get takedowns pretty frequently. I think he's very likely at range to outland Paiva for as long as they're there. The big question is, well, can he hold Paiva down? And I'm not sure. Maybe he can, but I'm not sure he can, because I don't know that I rate Morozov's grappling much higher than Kyler Phillips, and he couldn't hold Paiva down. So I question whether or not Morozov can. It wouldn't shock me if he did, but I know he'll get takedowns. He can definitely get 5, 6, 7 takedowns here. And then if he can't hold him down, well, then they're going to exchange on the feet a lot. And can Paiva knock him out? Yes, definitely. And that's really kind of my concern and why I'm trying to be a little price sensitive with this, because I do think I expect Morozov to land many more strikes. I expect him to be winning pretty much every round until he either gets hurt or finished. And again, I'm not saying he has a major durability issue, but he's facing basically a chin bully in Paiva, and that is something that if he can't hold him down could be a little concerning. But ultimately, I think Morozov should be the clear favorite here. I think the line right now could be a tad bit wider, but also, like I said, unless I get like minus 125, minus 130, I'm probably not going to play it. But I think Morozov is pretty clearly has the tools to handle Paiva at a fairly consistent basis. Moving on, we got TJ Brown. He's taking on Shailen Yurdimbeki. I don't really know how exactly you pronounce Shailen's name. I know he used to be like Yilan Shah or something, but I'm not sure what the actual pronunciation is. But anyway, this is an interesting fight here. TJ Brown, not a guy I rate very highly. I am appreciative of what TJ Brown brings to the table, which is a lot of volume and a willingness to wrestle and okay jiu-jitsu. But with that being the case, I just, I like the volume, but he's very, very hittable. He's proven time and again to be very, very fragile. He has very poor fight IQ. And even his grappling, while he's very, very proactive about it, I don't think it's very positionally sound. And I actually think his defensive grappling is very, very questionable. And so he's a guy that I'm always very hesitant to trust against anybody, because there's just so many red flags that he brings to the table. And on the other side, you have Shailen, who I don't also rate very much. You saw his fight, which he's fought a couple guys in the UFC. He's obviously coming off a win against Sean Soriano, got dominated in his debut by Joshua Kulibau. And as a striker, I just don't rate what he does pretty much at all. He just doesn't throw strikes. He'll throw powerful shots, but they're generally big looping hooks that are slow to get to the target. He's just very easy to get volume off on and avoid what's coming back at you. And in the wrestling, he's not like, sorry. He's not a bad wrestler. He's a decent wrestler, but he's not a great wrestler either. But he's proactive about it. He comes out and he's going to attempt 7, 8, 9 takedowns a fight. Once the fight gets to the mat, though, I do think his positional control is kind of loosey-goose as well. And so it's weird because you have two guys who want to do similar things. And honestly, it wouldn't totally shock me if Brown was able to just keep the standing and outstrike him, or just chose that path. But I sort of have a feeling like I'm not betting this fight just because, for one, on the Brown side of things, like I said, he's just such an untrustworthy fighter. But on the other side, the Shaolin side, there are some places where I think he theoretically can win. Like, I think if he can get on top of TJ Brown here, there's a chance he could have big success. Like, I have not, when I've seen TJ Brown on his mat on his back, he never uses conventional get ups. It's a lot of throwing up arm bars and going for Kimuras off his back. And that kind of stuff against a good grappler can get you in a lot of trouble. So, like, in theory, it's not a bad dog spot on the Shaolin side. The problem for me is it's just like, I don't, like I said, against a good grappler, it can get you in trouble. I'm not sure how good of a grappler Shaolin is, though. Like, I think he's okay, but it wouldn't shock me if Brown is like, I saw Sean Soriano sweeping him several times, and Sean Soriano is obviously a much worse grappler than TJ Brown is. So it wouldn't shock me if Brown managed to out scramble him here. And if Brown can out scramble him, he should have him covered. But again, I could only bet Shaolin. I can't blame anybody for taking the stab. Like, it also wouldn't shock me if he's able to just dominate this fight on the mat, get on top, and just own Brown. And even standing, while I favor Brown, it really wouldn't shock me if Shaolin was able to just land a hard shot and put him out. The guy, just the bottom line is he's not defensively responsible on the feet, and his chin does not seem like it's the best. So it's a pass fight for me, but I could only bet the dog here. Moving on, we have Tafon and Chukwi. He's coming back off a brutal flying knee knockout against Mirzakhanov. He's taking on Carlos Ulberg, who is coming off putting an entire crowd to sleep against Fabio Charant. And I like Chukwi quite a bit here, to be honest. I have 2.5 units on at about plus 120, but he's now, the line is flipped. You can get him anywhere between minus 110 and minus 125. But honestly, even at those numbers, I still like the spot for him. I personally think he's in the 60 to 65% range. And it's interesting because coming into the tape for this fight, my instinct was I would probably bet Ulberg at a closely lined fight because I haven't really rated Tafon particularly highly in the past, primarily because I don't think he has the best defense in the world. He prefers to, shell up rather than actually move his head. Just something I don't like to see. He tends to be a bit plodding. And I thought to myself, well, Ulberg's a more technical kickboxer. It's something he can probably take advantage of. But then you go back and you watch, Ulberg fight, both Charant and Kennedy, to be honest. And it's like the Charant fight, Charant literally did nothing for the entire fight. And then yet had two separate big moments in the fight where he was able to just land clean on Ulberg just by going forward on him. And the problem with Ulberg is while he is a technical offensive kickboxer, he fights with his hands down, which, okay, I mean, no one loves to see that, but there are guys, who effectively move their head enough and manage distance enough that it's fine and they can get by with it. But on top of that, he doesn't move his head at all, like literally at all. And so if you go forward on Ulberg, he's just very, very easy to hit. I mean, you look at the Kennedy fight, he almost finishes Kennedy about 2 minutes in. And after the first 2 minutes, Kennedy realized, oh, wait, I can just go forward and throw and I can hit him whenever I wanted. And he eventually finished him there. And I just, he had a fair amount of time off between the Kennedy and Charant fights. And so I was curious to see if he made any adjustments, but he hadn't. Charant dropped him, and then he also, got hurt in the second round of that fight too from Charant just deciding to blitz forward. And so I look at that and it's like, well, those are red flags. On top of which, it's like the guy's fought nobody. He beat Bruno Oliveira, which is not even a particularly strong win in Dana White's Contender Series. He beat Fabio Charant, who literally didn't have a win in the UFC, literally lost to the most bottom of the barrel guys at 205. And then he lost to Kennedy in a fight that was very ugly and a bad look. And it's like on the Tafon side, look, he's got issues, but he has almost 2x the amount of fights as him. He's actually had, I think, 4 fights in the UFC now. Jamie Pickett and Mike Rodriguez are not great wins, but they're much better wins than anything Ulberg's shown. He had a very close fight with Junyoung Park, who's far better than anybody Carlos Ulberg's fought. And with Tafon, like, I know I'm going to get volume. I know he's not going to get lulled to sleep like the Charant fight. So he's going to have a chance to land heavy here. And if he fights intelligently, and he brings the same kind of fight he brought to the Rodriguez fight where he goes forward, clinches up a lot, looks to be the pressure fighter, I think he's going to have massive success, to be honest. He should be able to get inside the distance he wants to be fairly easily. And I think he's the more durable fighter. And again, even though I don't rate Tafon's defense, shelling up is better than doing what Ulberg does, which is not moving his head at all and just kind of trying to stay at the edge of his opponent's range. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Tafon here. Don't get me wrong, Ulberg is a strong offensive kickboxer, so it wouldn't surprise me if he had a lot of success himself. Wouldn't surprise me if he knocked Tafon out, but ultimately, like minute to minute, I just trust every part of Tafon's game a bit more. I even think he's likely the one to have grappling upside if anybody did. So I have 2.5 units on him here. I think it's a pretty strong spot for him. Moving on, we got Chris Curtis. He's taking on Adolfo Vieira. And I have 1 unit on the Vieira side, about plus 130 here. You know, it's kind of interesting because I've been actively looking to fade Vieira, since the Hernandez fight, just because, Vieira is the kind of guy, and I don't want to say he doesn't strike me as a real fighter, but he doesn't really. It seems like he's always, ready to quit, when things go wrong. And it even seemed that way in the Stoltzfus fight, to be honest. And I bet Stoltzfus in that fight at the end of round 2. And then he managed to dig deep and win the fight, which was impressive. But that has nothing to do with my calculus here, really. Basically, Adolfo Vieira was getting lined as a -5, -600 favorite in all of his first 3 or 4 fights in the UFC. Chris Curtis comes in his first 2 fights. He's a plus 400 against Phil Hawes. He's getting his ass kicked in that fight and then just lands kind of a Mimi shot and puts him out. And then the same thing in his next fight, he comes in as a big underdog, pulls off an upset, knocks out Brendan Allen. But the point being, the market rated Curtis's skill set very, very low. And I'm not sure either of the 2 results we've seen have changed that. Like, I think Curtis is a reasonable striker, don't get me wrong. But we have a lifetime 170-pounder here who's fighting at 185 pounds. On top of which, it's like in this matchup, look, we all know what Adolfo Vieira brings to the table, right? It's absolutely world-class jiu-jitsu. He's a decent wrestler. He's going to go for it. And Curtis, while he's never been submitted, it's actually interesting running through his career because he actually hasn't really faced any submission grapplers. And the guys who have tried to grapple Chris Curtis have universally had success against him. Ray Cooper mounted him. Brendan Allen mounted him, but Brendan Allen just not positionally sound, fell off the back. Magomed Karamov dominated him on the mat 2 fights in a row. I don't think Curtis is a good grappler at all. He lets guys in on his hips very easily. He doesn't manage distance. Against the fence, he tends to keep a very narrow base. And so I think Vieira is going to get takedowns if he wants them fairly easy. And basically, based on how easy I've seen Curtis give up mount and give up his back, I expect Vieira probably is going to be able to cut through him pretty easy on the mat. But even if he can't, and he can't sub him, yes, there's always the massive cardio concern with Vieira, and that's why I'm on him very small. I only have a unit on him. Plus, there's a concern that he only has like 6 professional fights, 7 professional fights. Those are always kind of red flags. But in this case, it's just like, I don't know, one guy the market rated so highly, and the other guy the market rated so lowly, and now the positions have flipped. And while I would say the market's kind of regulating its outlook on Vieira to a fair extent, it's not doing so on the Curtis side to a fair extent. Like, this guy wasn't in the UFC for 35 fights for a while, for a reason. It's not, he didn't suddenly get good at 33 years old. And as much as the cardio thing scares me, it's like, even if this gets into round 2, late round 2, a Vieira takedown could probably still come pretty easily, and a takedown could be around here. So I like Vieira. I think you have to favor him in this spot, if I'm being honest. I also kind of think, and I don't know if I'll play it, but something I think is kind of interesting is the goes the distance, which is about plus 400. It's kind of an interesting dynamic and dichotomy between that and the Vieira line, where Vieira for goes the distance to be plus 400. It's almost saying like, I almost feel like Vieira has to be minus 200 just because so much of that, like, sure, you can say, oh, Curtis is going to finish him, but Curtis isn't a nuclear hitter, especially I would expect if these guys are fighting standing, it's going to be a lot of clinching up and a lot of Vieira not wanting to engage. And so I feel like a lot of that is pricing in the submission here. But let's just assume, Curtis hasn't ever been subbed. And if Curtis can fight the subs early, I think there's a very good chance it goes the distance. I don't know whether he can or not, but I think minus 700 is kind of nuts. And I think it's way overpricing, Curtis's 2 KOs. We just saw Vieira was 2 minutes away from going the distance in his last fight. I don't know if I'll bet it, but I do think 20% implied is a little silly, to be honest. Moving on, we have an interesting fight. Well, not that interesting, to be honest, and I'll keep this one short. We got Umar Nurmagomedov. He's coming back off a win off of Brian Keller. He's taking on Nate Manas. The most interesting thing about this fight is the line, where it's like we have Umar minus 1,200, Manas plus 650, and at the line, it's like it's probably wrong. That implies Umar around 87% or so. That seems extreme, especially for a guy in Manas who showed reasonable takedown defense against Tony Gravely, but at the same time, you guys know I'm not afraid to take a swing at something like this, but Modest's game tends to just be relentlessly negative. And by that, I mean, he fought Luke Sanders and was getting dominated until Sanders gassed out. Lost the first round to Johnny Munoz, so he gassed out on short notice. Tony Gravely, basically same thing happened. He almost got finished, eventually knocked him out. I don't know. I just don't. I appreciate like Monas is huge for the division. He hits pretty hard for the division, but he tends to never win minutes at all. And so if that's the case, if I'm going to bet Monas, it's got to be with somebody who's very likely to gas out. And I don't think Umar is that guy. On top of which, Umar can probably just play an outside kicking game here fairly easily. Like I rate Kelleher significantly better than Monas, and Umar cut through him. I'm not saying I'll never fade Umar. There may be a time, but Umar is very good at everything, whereas Manas, outside of like his takedown defense and his power, just isn't very good at anything, in my opinion. And so it's very, very, very hard for me, even though I'm like, oh, the line's probably wide. It's just like I can see how Umar wins this fight 9 out of 10. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I don't know. Nate's not the guy that I'm really looking to play at plus 600. So it's a pass for me. I think Umar should take care of him pretty easily, to be honest. Justin says I think Umar KO needs him. I hope so. I hope Nate wins the fight. That would be pretty cool. But I'm not very passionate about it. Moving on, though, we got Thiago Moises. He's taking on Christos Giagos. I actually have a small bet on Giagos here, and it's a very weird fight because obviously Moises was recently inside the top 15, which is very, very strange, to be honest, like rewatching his fights. And Giagos has had a very weird career. Like if you go through Giagos' career in the UFC, his UFC losses are Charles Oliveira, Drakkar Close in a very, very good fight. Armin Tsarukyan, who's obviously headlining this card. Those are his 3 UFC losses. On the other side, you have Mizuto Hirota, who he beat fairly easily. Damir Hadzovic beat easily. Carlton Minus beat easily. Sean Soriano, who he finished. It's just he's fought a crazy high level of competition. And even if you were to go back to his first UFC run, he went to decision with Chris Wade. He fought Gilbert Burns back then. Like he's just fought an insane level of competition and generally loses to top ranked guys and generally beats, lower end fighters. And the question is, well, what's Thiago Moises? And I personally, I don't really rate Thiago Moises that highly. He's won a couple real dicey fights. Obviously the Hernandez fight wasn't dicey, but I felt like he won that fight as much as anything because Hernandez just refused to do anything. The Bobby Green decision was an interesting one. And then you look at, he's also fought some very good competition, but he's really wilted whenever those guys have taken the fight to him, So like if you look at Moises' fight, his last fight with Joel Alvarez, he's a big favorite by all rights, especially seeing what happened to Alvarez against Tsarukyan. Everybody knew coming in that Moises' best path to winning that fight was to grapple there. He comes from a BJJ background. He's an okay wrestler, certainly a good enough wrestler to take down Joel Alvarez. And instead, Alvarez came out aggressive and Moises just wilted almost right away. And that's been a tendency throughout his whole career is when guys take the fight to him. Like if you give him a low tempo outside kickboxing match, he'll actually look pretty good because he's not bad technically. He's a decent counter striker. And if you give him that kind of fight, let him kind of get comfortable, he'll fight well. Same thing if you let him get offense grappling. But whenever guys are taking the fight to him, suddenly his volume stops coming. He starts to move back to the cage, shells up. And, I look at Christos Giagos and it's like, yeah, Giagos only beats cans, but he also only loses top level guys. And it's like this guy, everybody knows he's got a cardio issue, but what he's going to do is take the fight right to Thiago Moises. He's going to take it to him, and he's going to take it to him hard and fast. He's going to bring a lot of output, and he throws pretty hard. And I expect Giagos to have big success early in this fight. I think he's the better wrestler, to be honest. I don't expect him to wrestle, but I think he'll probably counter wrestle a bit. It wouldn't surprise me if he gets him out of there early. Obviously, there's big concerns about Giagos' gas tank passed around. But again, even that, like, Moises is never the guy to step on the gas. He's a very low volume fighter. And so I kind of think Jagos has more of a chance than he normally does to be able to stay in this for 15 minutes. And so to me, it's like not only has he fought a better strength of competition, but stylistically he matches up fairly well with Moises. Like plus 200 is kind of a no brainer. So I have a unit on Jagos there, plus 200. Um, but it's an interesting fight. We'll see what happens. It's very weird that Thiago Moises made it to the top 15, to be honest. But something that's even weirder is that this next fight is even further behind this on the card. We have Josh Parisian. He's taking on Alan Badeau. This is a disgusting fight, and it might be in the men's divisions like the lowest level fight we've ever had. I don't have a bet on it. I do see a lot of love for Alan Badeau this week, and frankly, I don't really understand, where it's coming from. I get it. Josh Parisian tends to be a punching bag, very easy to hit. But like, what has Alan Badeau had a good round against Rodrigo Nascimento, which again is fairly meaningless. He fought okay against Parker Porter, but still, lost that fight unanimously. Has shown basically no ability to get off his back when he ends up on the mat. He's just a terrible grappler in general. And he hasn't beaten any UFC level fighter in his entire career. He's taken a guy Parisian who's a lot more experienced. And while I don't rate Parisian really at all, it's like we've seen Parisian. He beat Roque Martinez. Not that that's anything special, but at least it's like a real person. He also went to a decision with Porter, and he actually had a lot more success in terms of strikes landed. And in fact, I'll pull the numbers up for you guys now against Parker Porter than Alan Badeau had. So if you go and look at that fight, so Parisian landed 114 significant strikes across 3 rounds of Parker Porter. That's a lot of strikes for heavyweight. Porter did get him down a couple times, but wasn't able to quite do as much as he could do to Badeau on the mat. But on the other side of this, with Badeau's side of it, sorry, my computer is having a heart attack right now. Badeau landed 55 strikes across 3 rounds, and part of that is he was able to be controlled for quite a bit of time on the mat. But the bottom line is I don't put too much value in similar level or what is it called? I'm drawing a blank here. Mutual competition, I guess, but or common opponent, sorry. But they have a common opponent here, and we know one of them dramatically outperformed the other one on the numbers, even if it didn't seem that way watching the fight live. But basically, to me, this comes down to neither guy is very. Parisian got a robbery win over odd job. That's great. Neither one of these guys, though, is very good. Beto's probably a slicker striker, but he has terrible gas. He's not durable. He tends to collapse. And if he ends up on his back, that's probably a round and maybe the fight. And so I look at this fight and I'm like, I don't understand how anybody can be passionate on the Badeau side of things. Like, I think Parisian stinks. Yes. I think Badeau stinks too. And like I said, I haven't bet it. I think it's notable, though, that it seems like everybody this week's on Badeau, and meanwhile, the line is still just hovering at minus 115. And to be completely honest, if Parisian moved out to like plus 110, plus 120, I'd probably poke it. He's just a much more experienced fighter. He's shown the ability to generate offense for the course of 15 minutes, which Badeau really hasn't. And like the best thing we can say about Badeau's entire career is he made it to a unanimous decision loss against Parker Porter. Okay. So I don't know. I don't put any stock in like Badeau here. I kind of lean the Parisian side. But again, the fight is just so low level. I'm not dying to take a side, but if Parisian moves the dog, I will take him. And the truth is, Parisian does have some subs on his resume, and I don't rate his wrestling particularly highly. But I do think if he gets on top of Badeau, Badeau's probably not getting up. And so whether you want to accept it or not, like that is a real dynamic in this fight. And with that being the case, it's just hard for me to say, okay, this is going to be a high volume fight where both guys land a lot of strikes, but one guy potentially could get on top and dominate around there. I mean, to me, it seems like that guy should be the favorite, personally. But anyway, moving on, we got the co-main event of the evening. Neil Magny, he's taking on Shavkat Rakhmonov. I'm still weighing my options, what to do with this fight. I'm definitely going to have money on Magny to some degree or another. I don't know I have to check if DraftKings updated their props yet, because something that I think is kind of interesting in this fight is decision only. Just because, and I'll get into the analysis now, but basically with Shavkat, look, I'm not going to lie, he has looked very, very good in the UFC so far. There is no question about that. And I actually am pretty bullish on what his future is. He hits very hard. He's clearly a very good athlete. He's a decent grappler. But also, it's worth mentioning that there's also like a lot of unknowns on the Shavkat side of things. Yes, he's 15-0. Most of the guys he fought in Russia were bums. Sure, the guys he fought in the UFC have great records, but it's like Alex Oliveira, won by a guillotine, who's also clearly not the guy he used to be. Let's just be honest here. The guy just got cut. Michel Prazeres in his last fight in the UFC, old, washed up a weight class, meaningless. And then last fight, Carlston Harris, it was basically a ho-hum fight where both guys were kind of just landing at range. And then, Shavkat hit him with a spinning wheel kick. And like, it was cool and all, but it's like, did it tell us anything about how he'll fight against real, like, high-level fighters in the UFC? It didn't really. And so while I am bullish on Shavkat's skills on the one side of things, on the other, I also kind of feel like people are just, not really contextualizing a lot of what's happened. And now we have Neil Magny, who everyone hates. No one likes betting on Neil Magny, let's be honest. But the truth is, Neil Magny has lost to nothing but top level fighters. Basically, if you're not a top 10 guy, you do not beat Neil Magny. And like, I don't think he's as dangerous a striker as, say, Shavkat is, but Magny tends to be very, very high output. He's going to go out there and he's going to keep the volume high for an entire fight. We saw Neil Magny win a decision against Jeff Neal a year and a half ago. Are people ready to say that Shavkat's a more dangerous striker than Jeff Neal? Perhaps he is, but I think that would be, quite a statement, and we just saw Magny beat Jeff Neal. Is he a better wrestler than Magny? Again, perhaps he is, but I don't know. Magny's a pretty decent wrestler himself. And then in terms of cardio, well, Shavkat's never been 15 minutes in his career. Magny, we know, has elite cardio and elite output. He's far more experienced. He's beaten much, much better fighters than what Shavkat's beaten. And so the line's minus 400, and I understand why. And look, obviously, when you're capping a fight, a significant portion of it, you have to assign a percentage to finishing ability. And obviously, Shavkat's got sensational finishing ability. But it's very hard for me to think, Shavkat finish should be past, I don't know, 35, 40%, And with that being the case, it's like, can his decision, like, is he really going to be 70, 75% to go to a decision? Or if they go to a decision, like, is he win that 75% of the time? Given Magny's history and his output, that seems kind of odd to me. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, Magny is the kind of guy who is exactly what you're looking for, and the kind of guy to win decisions. That's it. He is a guy that, like, his tools are basically perfect for minute winning, takedowns and volume, lots of output. I didn't love how he looked against Max Griffin early in that fight, but the reality is he's going to keep coming all fight. And so I feel like even if you want to make Shavkat favorite here, which I do think is fair, because the reality is he does have considerably more finishing upside than Magny. I don't even think you can really debate that. But even if you want to make him favorite here, it's like he's minus 450 now. Like, that's 82% implied percentage on how often he wins against a guy of Magny's caliber. That seems very, 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 very wide to me. And again, it's a weird fight in the sense that, if it turns out Shavkat can pass all of this test in flying colors, then it's possible the line was right in hindsight. But also, guys like Magny get consistently undervalued, and more often than not, these spots prove to be wrong. Regarding who Magny's faced, I mean, he beat Kelvin Gastelum, beat Johnny Hendricks, beat Carlos Condit, beat Li Jingliang, he's beaten Robbie Lawler, he beat Jeff Neal. He's beaten a ton of good guys. So, yeah, I mean, I get the takes on Shavkat, but I don't think there's any world where you can justify Shavkat being minus 450. My big question is, like, what's the decision only line look like? Because if that gets priced at like plus 250 Magny, well, then I'm just going to bet that, because it takes out a lot of the variance that Shavkat brings to the table. So I'm going to look at that, and if that's there, I'll play that. But if not, I'll probably have a small poke at Magny's money line. Probably won't go big because he is, getting older, and I do think Shavkat's an interesting prospect. He's very dangerous. But yeah, I mean, I think you have to like the Magny side. I don't really understand the people that are laying like minus 150 on Shavkat to finish here. I mean, Magny hasn't gotten fit. I mean, he's gotten finished a couple times in his careers, but not. He got submitted by RDA. I don't think he's getting submitted by Shavkat. Hans finished him, but he hurt his eye 2 seconds into that fight and spent the rest of the fight basically covering up and still survived for 20 minutes of it. I don't know. I don't see. I almost think it's interesting to fade the Shavkat finish if you have a book that offers not Shavkat ITD. And I think the GDD is interesting here, to be honest. So yeah, I leave the Magny side, not big or anything. Gonna check out what the decision only price is, but if that's decent, I'll probably be pretty heavy on that. Moving on though, we have the main event of the evening. Interesting fight. We have Mateusz Gamrot taking on Arman Tsarukyan. The truth is, I'm much more bullish on Tsarukyan and his future than I am on the Gamrot side of things. And it's unfortunate because I know a lot of people, and many of whom I respect very much, who really love Gamrot as a prospect. And so I was kind of hoping we'd get like Tsarukyan minus 150 and I could play that here. But unfortunately, he's out near minus 300. It's actually getting to the point now where I almost think it's getting a little wide. But the truth is, what this comes down to for me is like both guys are reasonable strikers. Maybe you could say there's a slight edge in the boxing to Gamrot, but they're both at their core grapplers. And I think it's fairly clear breaking that down. First of all, I think Tsarukyan's a much more physical grappler than Mateusz Gamrot is. Gamrot is a very good wrestler. Obviously, he's got a slick submission game, but I don't think he's tremendously physically strong. Whereas Tsarukyan, I mean, he looks like he was built in a lab. Like you saw this guy in his debut on short notice, basically winning positions in the body lock with Makhachev, took Makhachev down, having competitive scrambles. I cannot imagine Gamrot holding up similarly. And so I think in the grappling here, you have a very pronounced physical advantage on Tsarukyan's side. The striking's probably going to be close. It can maybe lean Gamrot. Though I'm not so sure, because the truth of the matter is, I say that, but Arman's outlanded just about everybody he's fought at distance. So it's like, do I really put any stock in that? Not really. But ultimately, I think it comes down to the wrestling, and I think Tsarukyan has a pretty large edge there. Even if he can't hold him down, I expect he'll be able to win most of the clinch positions, possibly get decent control early in the fight. The big concern for me, and the reason I'm not laying, the minus 300, and I'm not even interested in the minus 300, is we saw Tsarukyan gas out a couple times regionally, and we saw it in his debut. Now, I will say, I forgive his debut entirely. It's like a short notice fight against Islam Makhachev. Like, are you really going to hold that against him? And that fight was fought at an absolutely blistering pace, and since that fight, we saw his cardio look fine against OAM. He won the third round of that fight. It looked fine against Davi Hamos, won the third round of that fight. Looks fine against Matt Pravola, and it looks fine against Joe Alvarez. So I don't think he has a cardio issue, but in a fight where Arman's best path is likely ground-based, it's against a guy who probably can scramble up a good bit. It means he's probably going to have to exert a lot of energy, and there is some history of gassing there. Whereas on the Gamrot side, Gamrot's been in a number of 5-round fights regionally. On top of which, it's like, well, if Arman can't just dominate on the mat and his margins end up being pretty thin early, it's very possible that Gamrot could just take over this fight down the stretch. And so it's kind of weird. And I keep going back and forth because for this line to be like, I do think Arman is the better fighter. I think the striking's competitive and I think he's the better grappler. But also for this line to be right, it assumes that Arman can absolutely dominate this fight in the grappling. And while I think he's better and while I think he's much more physically strong, him dominating it seems unlikely. Like, I'd be surprised if Gamrot gets stuck on his back here. That would be pretty surprising. And so then you introduce the 5-round element to it, and it's like, I don't know, I think you have to favor Arman, and I would probably price him at about minus 200 here. But I certainly think there are paths for Gamrot to win this fight, especially if Arman slows down. And so, yeah, it's a very weird fight to break down because so much comes down to the cardio dynamic. Like, if you told me you knew for 100% Arman's cardio holds up over 5, well, then I'd be pretty comfortable saying this line is right-ish. because I do think margins on the Gamrot side, on both sides, could be thin, but I just think, Arman having the grappling in the back pocket, whereas Gamrot probably doesn't here, probably allows him a lot more room for error. But if it doesn't hold up, we know Gamrot can keep an output over 25. And I know I'm just going in circles at this point here, but it's an interesting fight. Like, I am more bullish on the chances of Arman winning a championship because I think he's a better athlete. I think he's more physically imposing. And he's also only 25 years old and has a lot of room to grow. But with that being said, there are obviously some interesting parts of this fight that are big question marks. Does that mean I'm going to bet Gamrot here? No. If the line pushed out further, though, to like plus 275 range, I might take a poke at it. But yeah, ultimately, I lean Arman in a 3-round fight. I actually would say this line is perfect. But yeah, I mean, there's enough concerns that I don't think you can bet Arman in a 5-round fight here. Frankly, I don't think you can bet Arman past minus 200 in a 5-round fight here. But I do think he's the deserved favorite. I am picking him to win this fight. I think he likely gets it done by decision. Probably, maybe the last couple rounds get sketchy, but I think the early run of this fight, if he approaches it right, he should be able to mostly handle Gamrot in the grappling. But yeah, it's interesting, and we'll see. And honestly, whoever wins this fight probably has maybe one more win to go before they get a title fight. So it's interesting. We'll see what happens. I'm looking forward to it. My official bets this week at Tafad and Chukwi, I have 2.5 units there, plus 124. I have 2 units on Cody Durden, plus 100. I got 1 unit on Rodolfo Vieira, plus 130. I have 1 unit on, Christos Chagas, plus 200. And I will probably have some kind of a play on Neil Magny this week. So that's going to do it for me this week, guys. I appreciate everybody coming in and checking it out. And thank you guys for sticking with us after last night. I know, we had the show scheduled, and unfortunately, other guys had some stuff come up. I was out of pocket, so I did not even know what was going on. But I'm glad you guys tuned in today. Good luck on your bets. Guys, please, if you like the show, drop a like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. We really appreciate it. And yeah, next week, we have a big pay-per-view coming up. So we'll be here Wednesday night, 10 p.m. Eastern, at the normal time next week. I promise. So yeah, best of luck, everybody. Good luck. Enjoy your weekend. Peace.